So over the weekend, I was just doing some reading on the web, and I came across an advertisement that was embedded in some content. And normally, I'm so used to seeing advertisements that my brain just skips right over them. But in this case, the advertisement had me somewhat transfixed, and that's because as I scrolled through the content, the background image of the advertisement stayed fixed in place. As you can see here, the image of the dog in the duck costume stays visually in the same place, even as I scroll the content. And this sort of threw my brain through a loop and definitely pulled me out of the reading experience, which I guess is exactly what advertisements are trying to do. And I wanted to see if I could figure out how that worked. Now, unfortunately, at the time, I was on my iPad, so I didn't have all the fancy web dev tools here that I could use to inspect and add breakpoints and listen for events. So I wanted to just see if I could figure out a way to implement this. Now, the tricky thing about this is, let's jump over into some HTML, is that typically what we have, what we have is an iframe here that serves up the ad. And the iframe is living at a different host than the parent page itself. So that means that we run into CORS, or cross-origin resource sharing restrictions, between the parent page and iframe, meaning that the iframe, for example, can't just add an event listener to the parent window. So I couldn't, for example, listen for the scroll event and then maybe adjust some sort of background position or transform CSS property. So in order to communicate across the different origins, I figured I had to use something like postMessage. And at first what I was doing was I was listening for scroll events in the parent page and then posting messages to the iframe. But the problem is that the postMessage is an asynchronous API, which means that there's some degree of delay between when the message is sent and when it gets applied to the target. And that degree of delay was enough to cause jankiness, such that as I scrolled, if I scrolled fast, you could definitely see the background image jumping around. So I was about to kind of give up when I came across an article on responsive ads by, I'm not even going to begin to pronounce his name correctly, Hans-Jörg Posch. And in that article, he actually reversed the direction of the messaging. Instead of having the parent page post messages to the iframe, he was having the iframe post messages to the parent. And that was an aha moment for me, because if I could have the iframe post messages to the parent, it means that I could come up with ways for the iframe to essentially style or apply CSS styles to the parent context. So if we look below here, and let's just consider all of this the advertisement, right? Because usually an advertisement is driven by some sort of script tag that you embed, and that script tag can essentially do whatever it wants. So in this case, the script tag will write out the viewport wrapper. So we're having a wrapper around the ad here and then the ad itself. And in this case, I'm going to listen for message events. And this, because it's just a demo, I'm not going to do any kind of CORS security checks. I'm not going to look at the origin. I'm not going to look at the source. I'm just going to blindly accept that the message is coming from the iframe. And the iframe data, or the event data, is going to have two sets of styles, one for the viewport and one for the frame itself. And then I'm just blindly looping over those styles and applying them to the parent page. So I'm going to get that message, I'm going to apply CSS to the ad viewport, I'm going to apply CSS to the iframe itself. Now let's look at what the iframe is telling us to do. So here's the content of the ad, right? This link here, much goose is such wow, right? That's this part. But when the page loads, it goes to the parent, posts the message, and again, it's going to include viewport and frame styles. And you can see in the viewport styles, we're actually including a background image and a background attachment CSS styling. In this case, the background attachment is fixed, which keeps the background image in place even as the window scrolls. Now, if I had tried to apply this to the iframe, internally to the iframe itself, for example, to the body background of the iframe, it wouldn't have mattered, because this is relative to the window itself, and the iframe is really a window within a window, so it wouldn't make any difference to the parent window. But by applying the styles to the parent window, we get to leverage that fixed property in relation to the parent context, not to the iframe context. So if we jump back over here and we actually inspect the styles, let's close the iframe here. You can see that on the viewport here, I'm applying that background image and background attachment. And that's what's allowing us to keep that background image in place as I scroll, which I think kind of, again, just creates It's not quite a parallax effect, right? Parallax is when the background actually moves at the same time. So I guess to some degree it's a sort of a squint hard enough parallax effect, and that the background and the foreground are moving at different paces. The background just not moving at all. But it was jarring enough as an advertisement to take me out of my kind of state of flow, which again is exactly what I think the advertisements are trying to do.